I want to talk about a few things today. We're going to be talking about New Year's. We're talking about listen, put your feet down on the ground. You can hear with your body. Every New Year's in Americana, there's a pressure about like what's your resolution going to be. Years ago, I gave that up for Lent, and it has worked for me. But what I'm trying this year is a word. A bunch of my friends have been doing this for a few years. They pick a different word that they just reflect on all year, and what are all their lessons, what does life work for them with that word. And I've kind of avoided that for the longest time because it felt like Americana resolved to be a new me, to lose weight, to whatever nonsense is being peddled at the time. And I came up with a weird word this year, mantle. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole story about why I chose this, but the impetus behind it was some years back, I was in a really bad, rough place in my life, and I managed to overcome it, and I went and did a thing, and after doing the thing, I got a shawl, and it reminded me that I did the thing, that I got past the really rough time in my life and did something incredible. And I've had that for almost 30 years. And I forgot about it in that context until recently, on the way home from church, I left it on a train in New Jersey Transit. That was back in December, so it's probably long gone. And I was really sad about it until I remembered why I actually got it in the first place was in hardship. I can overcome this really horrible thing. And I want to remember that. And I remembered it again. So mantle is a word I'm using all year, and you might hear about it more as the year goes on. But I want to put it out there because that framing, a shawl is a mantle, how we stand is a mantle, those are some ways. But it is getting me this year already, after years of this pandemic, reminding me that I got through that too. And maybe it's not over. It's not over. It's not over. And I still have, there's a story there that mantle is teaching me about having faith in myself. And I put that out there that is a lens for today. Another lens for this sermon I want us to think about is this time of year. This is my 16th year in the ordained ministry. And every year around January, we kind of do a sermon about what is Unitarianism, what does membership in our community mean? Because there's so many people normally outside of a pandemic environment. This month is the month where visitors are coming in person again, although we've had visitors all year round. So, and I mention that because I want to do it in a little different way. I usually do it the safe way, and it's a story, right? What is the lens in the story? It's a story that we tell about Unitarian Universalism from maybe the 90s through 2010, maybe the 80s through it. And it's we have this divide. There's atheists and there are theists, God talk, not God talk, whatever angle with it. And that was a story that was very lived in our experience of our faith. And we keep telling it. But there's a point over time, for those of us in this faith for decades and decades, and some of you have been doing this longer than I have. I'm only in the 30-year range. We're telling the story not to teach what we are, but we're telling the story to teach what we were. And these days, we have folks that belong to many things. In Eastern religious language, we talk about multiple belonging. Very normal in Asian religions, Eastern religions that some have come over, all have come over, really. Every religion's come over. But the mindset that, I think about this in some cultures in Asia where you might, in Japan, be born Shinto, and the rites are Shinto rites for birth. And when you die, the rites are Buddhist rites around death. And it isn't understood that one is winning or losing. It's a normal cultural reality. These are truths that are brought up in our community, and those truths matter, and the rights matter. It's a shared narrative context. The other thing, for those of you that are not Star Trek, any Trek fans out here? Only some of you may be picking up on this. We were just rewatching a series, Picard it's called. But so I'm watching View in the morning, and we're watching in between Picard and whatnot at night, and one of the language in there is shared narrative context they use. It's Star Trek speak to say, some of these things were believed before, and they may or may not be believed now, but they still matter. There's a cultural context. And it was a reference to the news of the day, nothing to do with religion. But I mention that because we have an epidemic in the West of religion as belief and only belief. And Eastern thought is a corrective. We can believe different things sometimes equally contradictory things, and they both can be true at the same time. If anyone doubts me on that in everyday living, for those that have a spouse and you're driving on the road, you both have very different experiences, right? And both people are right. How we take a story matters. Some of you do it too, right? I mentioned this in passing last December, which was last month. Back in 23, is that what you call it? I don't know. In 23, I mentioned St. John the Divine and the Paul Winter concerts. Those are two completely contradictory thoughts that are true at the same time. One is the cathedral of Christianity, arguably, in the West. And one is classical music about a pagan holiday, holy day, down to the sun rising again, literally about the solstice. And you might not even be Christian or pagan and attending it for a completely different reason. And we can all say there is a beauty in that. So if you're here for the first time in Unitarian Universalism, or this is your year 60-something or 70-something or whatever, this is also what Unitarian Universalism is trying to do. It's trying to say that we can belong in multiple places at the same time. We can have contradictory thoughts that have meaning and power. And there's still a there. Later in the service after this, we'll hear an Americana classical piece. I keep using Americana, and I'm not using it accurately. Sound of Silence, Simon and Garfunkel. Americana creates some good stuff too, right? And the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they made. For those that are not familiar with the song, is this a good body of work to exegete right now? How many have heard of Simon and Garfunkel? Most of you. Okay, good. And some of you won't tell me. And the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they made, and the sign flashed out its warning and the words that was forming. And the sign said, "The words of the prophets are written on the subway walls and tenement halls." I'm a child of the 70s and 80s. Neon was synonymous with excitement. It was also good stand-in for vice, excess, danger. We were also watching a lot of 80s movies and 90s movies this past illness, so I would advise away from the Philadelphia Project for anyone. But it was a lot of this. It was a lot of bad CGI that we thought was amazing back then. And sometimes all of that excess means just greed. I remember the first time I went to Las Vegas for a work conference. This is back in my IT days. There was a point when I was strolling around that I had to leave one of the major street intersections. The neon and the flashing lights were so much more extreme than even Times Square. My vision couldn't handle all that dazzle, and I was worried I was going to pass out. Now, these days, even Penn Station coming in over here, the screen is more impressive than Times Square was back in when Simon and Garfunkel were singing about this. But for a kid in the 70s or 80s, the man-made God is neon. And The Sound of Silence is a modern retelling of the golden calf story, where gold was melted into a false god that was worshipped. Idolatry. Unitarian Universalism still talks about things that we can believe and things we can't believe. It doesn't mean that it's a pass for anything you want to ever believe. There are some things that are dangerous to believe. From a Jewish perspective, there is a mindset in the literalist sense, when people take it out of context of a story that was written 3 millennia ago, or a life 2 millennia ago, and on, that the gods are statues, that people are actually worshiping the statue itself and not what the statue signified. I mean, there's a whole, in Eastern religions even, utterly different from the Western mindset. In Hinduism, you have this idea of darshan in the Hindi, that is to be viewed, to be seen. The statue is a vessel where you recognize that you are witnessed by the holy, by the divine, not that you're worshiping the statue. But there's a word in it that one word that conveys all of that. And we're so often, our challenge in Western notions is the scientific one, which is so useful, right? I mean, most of us are alive today because of something that science has gotten for us. But the literal isn't always what gets cracked open with science. Religion is more than, the butterfly pinned to a wall. You got a butterfly, it's beautiful, but it's dead, right? That's the metaphor I think about with belief locking us down. And so listen, silence. Do we fill in that space? I was saying earlier this week to one of the groups I'm in community that I've gotten in a habit about testing out and the idea of everything as a story. Well, that's a story, right? So like when someone does something on the road that I don't like, I have a story that fills in that silence. I'm not listening to the reality of what's happening, but my brain has written a novel that I can put right there instead. And silence invites us to not fill that story so much. And so in this new year, I invite us all to listen, to put our feet down on the ground. That song ends with the blood in our body. Listen to that metric. And that is how we can live out our multiple belonging, our idiosyncrasies, our different opinions in the same space. Now, but what does that mean in the context of modern society, false idols, and shared narrative context? I'll go from the Christian perspective, that's what I was raised in. Although what I'm about to say is in every world religion, the language is different. Jesus is clear about 5 things, and regardless of your view on his divinity, he told a lot of stories with an intent to teach a message. And it's why those of us that were trained in biblical exegesis will look at those stories from every angle, because there's something there. Judaism does it too with the Midrash. Goes back over story after story after story with a new context, right? But Jesus says 5 things. Feed the hungry. We can agree on that. It's written there. And shelter the homeless, care for the sick, clothe the naked, and free those in prison, or visit those in prison. They're flat out. They're not a story. They're a teaching. They're straight up. They're written in the text in the scripture that we all agree on. Whatever the original language was, this is what it means today. That should be straightforward. But when you turn on the news again, up can be up, it can be down, it can be left, it can be right. And religion in the dominant world takes on a dangerous tone to it. And I ask myself, so when we say we have these values, and we say we have this identity, and they're opposite things, the question is, which are you belonging to? Are we belonging to an American cultural religiosity? Or are we belonging to a set of values? And that's where we land here in Unitarian Universalism. We land on the values. But we invite everyone to recognize that each person is sitting in a different pew seat today. Here or at home, it's not a pew seat. And they have a different perspective. But the values have to come back, or we're not talking about the same thing. I invite us in the coming weeks to look at our news, our shared narrative context in that way, and wonder about the idols that we allow to be brought down mainstream. That bull down by Wall Street is a sign of New York City. And I remember during the Occupy movement parading down from Judson to remind what the golden calf story is about. And that's where we are today. Amen, and blessed be